In March of 2013, an internet firestorm erupted when TED, the renowned series of global conferences, chose to remove from its YouTube channel the talk of the acclaimed author and biologist Dr. Rupert Shedrake. According to TED, their decision was based on the advice of an anonymous scientific board that claimed Dr. Shedrake's talk crossed the line into pseudo-science and contains serious factual errors and many misleading statements. Dr. Shedrake refuted these claims, after which TED crossed out its original public statement. The issue remains open for discussion on the official TED blog, and thousands of commenters have voiced their disapproval of TED's actions. We asked Dr. Shedrake to offer his own perspective on these recent events.
My TED talk started with some girls, some charming girls in London, asking me to do it at their TEDx event. They were 22-year-old students. And at first I said no, because I said I didn't like the TED business model where they pay their speakers nothing and make tens of millions a year out of conference revenues. And she said, oh no, they weren't charging lots of money and that wasn't like that. And then at first I said no. Then it turned out that these girls were friends of my son, Cosmo. And he then asked me and said he was going to perform at their event and they really wanted me to do it and would I do it. So under pressure from my own son, I agreed to do it. And their event was called Challenging Existing Paradigms, so that made sense. And they were charming and delightful to work with, and the event was a great success, and the crowd there were friendly and interesting. It sold out weeks beforehand. And then they put up the talk on the TEDx site, following all the standard procedures. And all went well for about 2 months, until it came to the attention of Jerry Coyne, who then wrote a blog denouncing TED for providing a platform for my talk and attacking me. So something that had just gone on in a perfectly normal, calm way in the normal TED format, and my talk had had about 35,000 views on the TEDx website, suddenly resulted in this tremendous controversy. Now, I didn't know anything about the controversy. I was traveling in a remote part of India with my wife when this burst. And, I didn't get emails. And when I did, I started getting emails about what's going on and this controversy. They might take your talk down. They opened a discussion forum on whether to take my talk down. And 10 to 1, the people on the forum said, no, don't take it down. So they took it down anyway. And then banned or took down the talk by Graham Hancock and put them in the special naughty corner of the internet with a kind of health warning by their science board saying it was pseudo-science. So they then published a statement from the science board saying why they thought it was pseudo-science. And the statement was so ludicrously wrong. It said that my remarks on the speed of light had all been refuted and it didn't drop by 20 kilometers per second between 1928 and 1945. It was very easy to show that in fact it did, and the figures they quoted simply left out those dates. It was very easy to refute every one of their points, which I did. So they then struck out the Science Board statement, published my refutation, and tried to move the debate on to another blog. They kept moving blogs to try and shake off this very hostile discussion thread. Altogether, the taking down of my talk resulted in more than 5,000 comments on TED discussion threads, more than any other TED talk in history. And after they took it down and pushed it in the naughty corner, it went up on a whole range of pirate websites, as well as their official naughty corner, and it's on at least 12 of other sites now. And I just looked at 2 or 3 of them the other day, and the total views on those came to more than 200,000. So when you add in the ones on Ted's own site and all the other pirate sites, it must be getting on for over 500,000 by now. So the number of views has gone up enormously since they tried to ban the talk. When they first banned it, it was going very badly for TED. Their reputation was in shreds, and lots of their fans were deeply disillusioned. And I think it created a kind of existential crisis. And Chris Anderson, the head of it, emailed me and asked if he could speak to me. So he rang me up, and we had a long conversation, nearly an hour. And I got on quite well with him. I think that he regretted rushing into removing these talks, mine and Hancock's. But he was also kind of a captive of circumstance by then, and they had to justify it. I think it wasn't just Jerry Coyne, it was also P.Z. Myers, who's similarly an atheist, a militant atheist blogger. I think what's the reason that this small group of militant atheists and dogmatic skeptics punch so far above their weight is that they claim to speak with the authority of science. They claim to speak for the scientific community, and they speak in the name of science. Now, that gives them a huge authority insofar as people believe them, because science has enormous authority. Everything in the modern world depends on it. So by claiming to speak in the name of science, they borrow the authority of science to give their own opinions vastly greater weight than they ought to have. This is, of course, a standard tactic among militant atheists. Richard Dawkins is the primary example. Richard Dawkins, when he was a professor at Oxford, was not professor of zoology or evolution. He was professor of the public understanding of science. And he spoke as professor of the public understanding of science. And therefore people assumed that with that authority and a chair at Oxford, he was speaking for science. And for him, science equals atheism, not just atheism, but militant atheism. And a lot of the media have actually bought into that. I think it's partly because many people in the media are themselves either atheists or very sympathetic to the atheist point of view. So that means that they get easy platform for their views in the mainstream media, especially in the science among science correspondents. And the other thing is that the skeptic groups are very well organized. For years now, the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, or SciCop, have been running the Skeptical Inquiry magazine, which has a circulation of at least 50,000. Then there's Michael Shermer's Skeptic magazine, again about 50,000, I think. Then there's the British Skeptic magazine. So we've got, tens of thousands, over 100,000 skeptics, regular paid-up subscribers to skeptic magazines, plus large numbers of people who go to skeptic websites, who use this position, this label of skeptic, to justify a kind of atheist, materialist point of view, and to use their skeptical stance as a way of propagating this point of view militantly. Now, the skeptic organizations don't just publish their own magazines. They have a very effective campaign with the press. I discovered this years ago. I once did an interview for USA Today. They had a very sympathetic reporter, and they did a one-page spread about my work on dogs that know when their owners are coming home and other research on psychic pets. And when the article came out, the reporter rang me almost in tears soon afterwards to say that the editor of USA Today had this angry phone call from a member of the skeptic organization saying they'd discredited their newspaper, that I was a pseudo-scientist and a charlatan, and they'd been duped. And in future, any stories they wrote about telepathy or nonsense like that should be checked with the proper scientific authorities, namely themselves first, so they could issue a comment. So this kind of proactive way of influencing the media, attacking the people who provide the platform, they attack the editors. It's no coincidence that Coyne attacked TED. He attacked TED more than he attacked me. Is their way of trying to maintain a control over what appears in the serious media. So now they also have, in the Skeptical Inquirer last year, I subscribed to it because I feel I need to know what they're up to. I also subscribed to the British Skeptic magazine. There was an article by a woman skeptic, advocating skeptics to get involved in their campaign to make sure that Wikipedia reflects what they see as the true scientific position on things like telepathy and pseudoscience. And they have lots of people who are, well, I don't know how many, but they have a significant number of dedicated activists working in Wikipedia, making sure that in every possible way it reflects the materialist and skeptic point of view. And they've learned the rules, they've become expert editors, and they've infiltrated Wikipedia because, as they argued in the Skeptical Inquirer, this is where most children and students get their information from, and indeed where most people get their information from. So it's very important for them that it reflects the skeptical point of view. So they've had a determined campaign, and I think it's probably a relatively small group of activists, but they're committed, active, proactive, whereas people who work in psychical research or in other branches of more unconventional science haven't been spending their time trying to influence the media and get their message to dominate the airwaves. They've been getting on with doing their research. So I think that's the reason they've got into this position. And I think the other reason they've been so successful is that there's nothing new in this campaign. If you look back to the late 19th century, skeptics and materialists were carrying out very much the same kind of campaign against psychical research even then. And this kind of aggressive, scornful, dismissive style of polemic was already well in place in the 19th century. Nothing much has changed, really, except that they now have even more media to put their view across in, and they probably increased their influence over the serious media.
The science delusion is the belief that science already understands the nature of reality in principle, leaving only the details to be filled in. This is a very widespread belief in our society. It's the kind of belief system of people who say, I don't believe in God, I believe in science. It's a belief system which has now been spread to the entire world. But there's a conflict in the heart of science between science as a method of inquiry based on reason, evidence, hypothesis, and collective investigation, and science as a belief system or a worldview. And unfortunately, the worldview aspect of science has come to inhibit and constrict the free inquiry, which is the very lifeblood of the scientific endeavor. Since the late 19th century, science has been conducted under the aspect of a belief system or worldview, which is essentially that of materialism, philosophical materialism. And the sciences are now wholly owned subsidiaries of the materialist worldview. I think that as we break out of it, the sciences will be regenerated. What I do in my book, The Science Delusion, which is called Science Set Free in the United States, is take the 10 dogmas or assumptions of science and turn them into questions, seeing how well they stand up if you look at them scientifically. None of them stand up very well. What I'm going to do is first run through what these 10 dogmas are, and then I'll only have time to discuss one or two of them in a bit more detail. But essentially the 10 dogmas, which are the default worldview of most educated people all over the world, are first that nature is mechanical or machine-like. The universe is like a machine, animals and plants are like machines, we're like machines. In fact, we are machines. We're lumbering robots, in Richard Dawkins' vivid phrase, with brains that are genetically programmed computers. Second, matter is unconscious. The whole universe is made up of unconscious matter, There's no consciousness in stars, in galaxies, in planets, in animals, in plants, and there ought not to be any in us either, if this theory is true. So a lot of the philosophy of mind over the last 100 years is trying to prove that we're not really conscious at all. So the matter's unconscious, then the laws of nature are fixed. This is Dogma 3. The laws of nature are the same now as they were at the time of the Big Bang, and they'll be the same forever. Not just the laws, but the constants of nature are fixed, which is why they're called constants. Dogma 4, the total amount of matter and energy is always the same. It never changes in total quantity, except at the moment of the Big Bang, when it all sprang into existence from nowhere in a single instant. The fifth dogma is that nature is purposeless. There are no purposes in all nature, and the evolutionary process has no purpose or direction. Dogma 6, biological heredity is material. Everything you inherit is in your genes, or in epigenetic modifications of the genes, or in cytoplasmic inheritance. It's material. Dogma 7, memories are stored inside your brain as material traces. Somehow everything you remember is in your brain in modified nerve endings, phosphorylated proteins. No one knows how it works, but nevertheless, almost everyone in the scientific world believes it must be in the brain. Dogma 8, your mind is inside your head. All your consciousness is the activity of your brain and nothing more. Dogma 9, which follows from Dogma 8, psychic phenomena like telepathy are impossible. Your thoughts and intentions cannot have any effect at a distance because your mind's inside your head. Therefore, all the apparent evidence for telepathy and other psychic phenomena is illusory. People believe these things happen, but it's just because they don't know enough about statistics, or they're deceived by coincidences, or it's wishful thinking. And Dogma 10, mechanistic medicine is the only kind that really works. That's why governments only fund research into mechanistic medicine and ignore complementary and alternative therapies. Those can't possibly really work because they're not mechanistic. They may appear to work because people would have got better anyway, or because of the placebo effect. But the only kind that really works is mechanistic medicine. Well, this is the default worldview, which is held by almost all educated people all over the world. It's the basis of the educational system, the National Health Service, the Medical Research Council, governments, and it's just the default worldview of educated people. But I think every one of these dogmas is very, very questionable. And when you look at it, they fall apart. I'm going to take first the idea that the laws of nature are fixed. This is a hangover from an older worldview before the 1960s, when the Big Bang theory came in. People thought that the whole universe was eternal, governed by eternal mathematical laws. When the Big Bang came in, then that assumption continued, even though the Big Bang revealed a universe that's radically evolutionary, about 14 billion years old, growing and developing and evolving for 14 billion years, growing and cooling, and more structures and patterns appear within it. But the idea is all the laws of nature were completely fixed at the moment of the Big Bang, like a cosmic Napoleonic code. As my friend Terence McKenna used to say, modern science is based on the principle, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. And the one free miracle is the appearance of all the matter and energy in the universe and all the laws that govern it from nothing in a single instant. Well, in an evolutionary universe, why shouldn't the laws themselves evolve? After all, human laws do, and the idea of laws of nature is based on a metaphor with human laws. It's a very anthropocentric metaphor. Only humans have laws. In fact, only civilized societies have laws. As C.S. Lewis once said, to say that a stone falls to earth because it's obeying a law makes it a man and even a citizen. It's a metaphor that we've got so used to, we forget it's a metaphor. In an evolving universe, I think a much better idea is the idea of habits. I think the habits of nature evolve. The regularities of nature are essentially habitual. This was an idea put forward at the beginning of the 20th century by the American philosopher C.S. Peirce. And it's an idea which various other philosophers have entertained, and it's one which I myself have developed into a scientific hypothesis, the hypothesis of morphic resonance, which is the basis of these evolving habits. According to this hypothesis, everything in nature has a kind of collective memory. Resonance occurs on the basis of similarity. As a young giraffe embryo grows in its mother's womb, it tunes in to the morphic resonance of previous giraffes. It draws on that collective memory. It grows like a giraffe and it behaves like a giraffe because it's drawing on this collective memory. It has to have the right genes to make the right proteins, but genes, in my view, are grossly overrated. They only account for the proteins that the organism can make, not the shape or the form or the behavior. Every species has a kind of collective memory. Even crystals do. This theory predicts that if you make a new kind of crystal for the first time, the very first time you make it, it won't have an existing habit. But once it crystallizes, then the next time you make it, there'll be an influence from the first crystals to the second ones all over the world by morphic resonance. It'll crystallize a bit easier. The third time, there'll be an influence from the first and second crystals. There is, in fact, good evidence that new compounds get easier to crystallize all around the world, just as this theory would predict. It also predicts that if you train animals to learn a new trick, for example, rats learn a new trick in London, then all around the world, rats of the same breed should learn the same trick quicker just because the rats have learned it here. And surprisingly, there's already evidence that this actually happens. Anyway, that's my own hypothesis in a nutshell of morphic resonance. Everything depends on evolving habits, not on fixed laws. But I want to spend a few moments on the constants of nature too, because these are, again, assumed to be constant. Things like the gravitational constant, the speed of light, are called the fundamental constants. Are they really constant? Well, when I got interested in this question, I tried to find out. They're given in physics handbooks. Handbooks of physics list the existing fundamental constants, tell you their value. But I wanted to see if they'd changed, so I got the old volumes of physical handbooks. I went to the Patent Office Library here in London, and they're the only place I could find that kept the old volumes. Normally people throw them away when the new values come out. They throw away the old ones. When I did this, I found that the speed of light dropped between 1928 and 1945 by about 20 kilometers per second. It's a huge drop because they're given with errors of only fractions of decimal points of error. And yet, all over the world, it dropped, and they were all getting values very similar to each other with tiny errors. And then in 1945, it went up, 48, it went up again. And then people started getting very similar values again. I was very intrigued by this, and I couldn't make sense of it. So I went to see the head of metrology at the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington. Metrology is the science in which people measure constants. And I asked him about this. I said, what do you make of this drop in the speed of light between 1928 and 1945? And he said, oh dear, he said, you've uncovered the most embarrassing episode in the history of our science. So I said, well, could the speed of light have actually dropped? And that would have amazing implications if so. He said, no, of course it couldn't have actually dropped. It's a constant. So, well then how do you explain the fact everyone was finding it going much slower during that period? Is it because they were fudging their results to get what they thought other people should be getting, and the whole thing was just produced in the minds of physicists? We don't like to use the word fudge. I said, well, what do you prefer? He said, well, we prefer to call it intellectual phase locking. So I said, well, if it was going on then, how can we be so sure it's not going on today? And that the present values are produced by intellectual phase locking. And he said, oh, we know that's not the case. I said, how do we know? He said, We've solved the problem. And I said, well, how? He said, well, we fixed the speed of light by definition in 1972. So I said, but it might still change. He said, yes, but we'd never know it because we've defined the meter in terms of the speed of light. So the units had changed with it. So he looked very pleased about that. They'd fixed that problem. But I said, well, then what about big G, the gravitational constant known in the trade as big G? It's written with a capital G, Newton's universal gravitational constant. That's varied by more than 1.3% in recent years. And it seems to vary from place to place and from time to time. And he said, oh, well, those are just errors. And unfortunately, there are quite big errors with big G. So I said, well, what if it's really changing? I mean, perhaps it is really changing. And then I looked at how they do it. What happens is they measure it in different labs. They get different values on different days, and then they average them. And then other labs around the world do the same, and they come out usually with a rather different average. And then the International Committee on Metrology meets every 10 years or so and average the ones from labs around the world to come up with the value of big G. But what if G were actually fluctuating? What if it changed? There's already evidence, actually, that it changes throughout the day and throughout the year. What if the Earth, as it moves through the galactic environment, went through patches of dark matter or other environmental factors that could alter it? Maybe they all change together. What if these errors are going up together and down together? For more than 10 years, I've been trying to persuade metrologists to look at the raw data. In fact, I'm now trying to persuade them to put it online on the internet with the dates and the actual measurements and see if they're correlated, to see if they're all up at one time, all down at another. If so, they might be fluctuating together, and that would tell us something very, very interesting. But no one has done this. They haven't done it because G is a constant. There's no point looking for changes. You see, here's a very simple example of where a dogmatic assumption actually inhibits inquiry. I myself think that the constants may vary quite considerably, well, within narrow limits, but they may all be varying. And I think the day will come when scientific journals like Nature have a weekly report on the constants, like stock market reports in newspapers. You know, this week, big G was slightly up, the charge on the electron was down, the speed of light held steady, and so on. That's one area, just one area where I think thinking less dogmatically could open things up. One of the biggest areas is the nature of the mind. This is the most unsolved problem, as Graham just said, that science simply can't deal with the fact we're conscious. And it can't deal with the fact that our thoughts don't seem to be inside our brains. Our experiences don't all seem to be inside our brain. Your image of me now doesn't seem to be inside your brain, yet the official view is there's a little Rupert somewhere inside your head, and everything else in this room is inside your head. Your experience is inside your brain. I'm suggesting actually that vision involves an outward projection of images. What you're seeing is in your mind, but not inside your head. Our minds are extended beyond our brains in the simplest act of perception. I think that we project out the images we're seeing, and these images touch what we're looking at. If I look at you from behind, you don't know I'm there. Could I affect you? Could you feel my gaze? There's a great deal of evidence that people can. The sense of being stared at is an extremely common experience, and recent experimental research suggests it's real. Animals seem to have it too. I think it probably evolved in the context of predator-prey relationships. Prey animals that could feel the gaze of a predator would survive better than those that couldn't. This would lead to a whole new way of thinking about ecological relationships between predators and prey, also about the extent of our minds. If we look at distant stars, I think our minds reach out in a sense to touch those stars and literally extend out over astronomical distances. They're not just inside our heads. Now, it may seem astonishing that this is a topic of debate in the 21st century. We know so little about our own minds that where our images are is a hot topic of debate within consciousness studies right now. I don't have time to deal with any more of these dogmas, but every single one of them is questionable. If one questions it, new forms of research, new possibilities open up. And I think as we question these dogmas that have held back science so long, science will undergo a reflowering, a renaissance. I'm a total believer in the importance of science. I've spent my whole life as a research scientist, my whole career. But I think by moving beyond these dogmas, it can be regenerated. Once again, it can become interesting and, I hope, life-affirming. Thank you.
On this episode of Skeptico, Alex talks with Dr. Rupert Shedrake about being censored by the TED conference.
The irony of this is, if not hilarious, it's certainly inescapable. I mean, a reputable scientist publishes a book claiming that science is dogmatic and then is censored by an anonymous scientific board. What does this say how science can be dogmatic without even realizing it's dogmatic?
Well, I think in a way, there's this whole controversy, and the people who've weighed in favor of the TED actions do indeed confirm what I'm saying, that these dogmas are ones that most people within science don't actually realize are dogmas. They just think they're the truth. And the point about really dogmatic people is that they don't know they have dogmas. Dogmas are beliefs, and people who have really strong beliefs think of their beliefs as the truth. They don't actually see them as beliefs. So I think this whole controversy has actually highlighted exactly that. The other thing it's highlighted is that there are a lot of people, far more than I imagined actually, who are not taken in by these dogmas, who do want to think about them critically.
Stay with us for Skeptico.
Welcome to Skeptico, where we explore controversial science with leading researchers, thinkers, and their critics. I'm your host, Alex Sakaris, and on this episode of Skeptico, well, I'm kind of interrupting my usual interview flow that I have going on to kind of do something timely and newsworthy. And that is, I've asked Dr. Rupert Shedrake to come on and briefly talk about this recent controversy that's been stirred up about him being censored by the TED conference. So it's really caused quite a big stir, and a lot of people are talking about it. And I thought it was so relevant to the kind of topics that we have on here that I would interrupt the 3 or 4 interviews I have piled up to publish and ask Dr. Shedrake to come on. So here is my interview with Dr. Rupert Shedrake regarding being censored by the TED conference. Today we welcome Dr. Rupert Shedrake back to Skeptico. Many of you know the work of Cambridge biologist Dr. Rupert Shedrake, including his latest book, Science Set Free. But now you may have heard that this book has seemed to have struck quite a nerve, because Dr. Shedrake has found himself in the middle of a controversy surrounding the censorship of a video lecture that he presented and that was then posted on the very popular TEDx YouTube channel, and then removed after, and get this, by an anonymous scientific board that deemed it unscientific. Rupert, welcome back to Skeptico. Thanks for joining us. Tell us what's happened here.
Well, you summarized it more or less. I gave a talk at the TEDx series of talks in London, in Whitechapel. The organizers were young women, students at London University, who organized a very lively event. And it was called Challenging Existing Paradigms. So they asked me to talk about challenging existing paradigms, which seemed just the right theme for my book, Science Set Free. So I did a TEDx talk for it. It was extremely popular. The event was sold out. There was a lot of lively discussion. It was really fun. It went up on the TEDx website, as these TEDx talks often do. And all was well until it was denounced by 2 of America's leading militant skeptics, P.Z. Myers and Jerry Coyne, who didn't like it because it upset their rather dogmatic materialist worldview. So they called for it to be taken down, and they said TED had discredited itself, etc. They put enormous pressure on TED, and then they got armies of their supporters to send emails to TED and put comments on websites. So the TED people backed down. They removed it. And then, having removed it, they had to justify removing it. So they had this report from their so-called scientific board, an anonymous board. I don't know if it includes Jerry Myers or people like that. We don't know who it includes. They wouldn't reveal it. And they took it down. It's not exactly censorship, as they insist on pointing out. They put it with a kind of health warning.
Right.
So that it was still there, but it had been put in a kind of naughty corner of the internet, not on the main TED site. That stirred up a very big controversy, and I replied to the accusations of their science board one by one. They were all very easy to refute. But then the thing spiraled out of control, and a huge controversy blew up all over the internet, with lots of people taking it up on Facebook and blogs. And things were going pretty badly for TED. I then had a call about a week ago from Chris Anderson himself, the head of TED. And he was obviously really worried about this and was trying to calm the situation down, which they've now done by putting my talk on a separate blog, separate from the other one they took down by Graham Hancock, and saying it's open for debate and having people put comments there online, the great majority of which are supporting my talk and not the actions of TED or the very intemperate and emotional and, I have to say, rather unintelligent remarks of Jerry Coyne and P.Z. Myers.
Right. So as you mentioned, Chris Anderson is the founder and the head idea spreader, if you will, at TED. And it's nice to know that he's connected with you personally. I would have loved to have had Mr. Anderson on Skeptico or any of his scientific advisors on Skeptico. I think it would have been quite a debate. Really not much of one because, as you alluded to, anyone who reads your point-by-point counter to their claims, it's pretty one-sided, and I think most of the commenters on the TED website would agree with that. But what I thought we might do today to give folks a little sense for the spirit of this discussion and, in a broader sense, this controversy that you bring up in your book, Science Set Free, about whether or not science is dogmatic, whether or not science can get itself out of this rut it's in. What I thought we might use as a vehicle for that is for me to kind of play the role of Chris Anderson and use some of the words and ideas that he spread on his blog about this controversy and get a response from you. Does that sound like something we might be able to do?
Yes, okay.
So let's start with this one. First off, Dr. Shedrake, you got to appreciate the position that TED is in. I mean, the TED conference, TEDx, these are important worldwide brands. We're the ideas worth spreading people. And we have to make sure that the ideas on our site are really worth spreading. And to that end, I'm going to have a hard time keeping a straight face on this. Here we go. One of the hardest lines for us to draw is this line between science and pseudoscience. And TED, let me tell you, we're committed to science, but we think of it as a process, not as a locked-in body of truth. I want you to know that. But some speakers, as you know, will use the language of science to promote views that are incompatible with all reasonable understanding of the world. And giving them a platform is counterproductive. So, Dr. Shedrake, you have to understand our position here. I mean, we do have to look into these ideas that are presented on our website.
Well, I mean, that is, and I do see Chris Anderson's point of view, and indeed, I had a long conversation with Chris Anderson on the telephone, and we got on perfectly well. I wasn't particularly angry with him or anything like that. I mean, it was a reasonable conversation, and, you know, they do have a point. There's a lot of rubbish, and there has to be some kind of filter. So I'm not against the idea of a filter, but what I am against is the idea of applying a filter in a very partial kind of way. there are lots of things up on the TEDx website which are controversial. For example, there are a lot of talks by militant atheists, which a lot of people find controversial. A lot of people disagree with what they say and think they're factually wrong in a variety of ways. But those haven't been flagged up or put in the naughty corner. Those have been allowed absolutely free run on the internet. They're put up on the main website, talks by people like Richard Dawkins, for example. And the difference here is that my talk was flagged up as being pseudo-scientific because Jerry Coyne didn't like it. Well, Jerry Coyne is a very bigoted man who writes very loud-mouthed things on his website. And I don't take him very seriously. I mean, he's a polemicist, a kind of Dawkins-type polemicist. So they paid a lot of attention to what Jerry Coyne and PZ, I suppose you say PZ Myers, said on their websites. But if there'd been a similar attack by, say, Christian fundamentalists on Dawkins, they would have ignored it. But if it's by scientific fundamentalists, then they pay attention. And what's more, don't just pay attention, but dig themselves into a hole trying to justify this. So I think the problem here is that an attempt to filter out content was done in an extremely biased way. If every TED talk which is controversial was flagged up by somebody who didn't like it and put in the naughty corner, all the most interesting talks would be in the naughty corner. Only the dullest would be on the main website. And what's more, TED, in their instructions to the organizers of the TEDx events, told them they wanted controversial talks. They said controversy energizes. But when it's in a particular area, one that upsets the dogmatic materialists, then they back down and say that's not the right thing to have. So I think that it's been inconsistent. They've paid far too much attention to these very biased and, I think, minority and strident voices.
Yeah, but see, Dr. Shedrake, that's not the case, because when they went to their scientific board, the majority of them agreed that your and Graham Hancock's videos should be removed from circulation. Didn't they do the right thing? They went to their anonymous scientific board.
Well, we don't know who the scientific board are, so we don't know if it's the right thing. If we look at the TED Board of Advisors, the brain trust for TED, so-called on the website, the main people in the area of consciousness studies are Steven Pinker and Daniel Dennett, both of whom are extreme militant atheists and materialists. So we just don't know what kind of people are on the scientific board. And so it's hard to, and we don't know how many they consulted. Is the majority 2 out of 2, or is it sort of 20 out of sort of 30 or something? We don't know. I imagine it was just 1 or 2 phone calls.
You have to acknowledge that these folks have to remain anonymous, right? I mean, they're a scientific board. They have to be anonymous for obvious reasons.
Well, I took this up with Chris Anderson. I said, well, why don't they come out of the shadows and tell us who they are? It's hard to face anonymous accusers. So he said, well, we can't ask the scientific board to be named or to come out in public, because if they did, they might get attacked. They might even get pilloried. So I said to him, well, don't you think by making these unreasonable attacks on my talk, accusing me of numerous factual errors, of pseudo-science, etc., you're pillorying me? And he said, well, that's different. I said, well, why is it different? He said, well, because you gave the talk. I gave the talk at their invitation, after all. I didn't get paid for it. And I fulfilled all the criteria. It was on emerging, contradicting existing paradigms and so forth. Anyway, so this, I think, is a very unreasonable objection, and I think that the Science Board should be named. I mean, after all, he said the analogy was with peer review in journals. In peer review in journals, the peer reviewers are anonymous, but so are the people whose papers they're reviewing. The authors are removed from the papers that are submitted to peer reviewers. The whole thing is anonymous. And the editor of the journal who makes the decisions is not anonymous. You can look up the editorial board of any scientific journal, and their names are given there. So you know who's ultimately responsible. In this case, you don't. So it's very hard to know whether the scientific board even exists, or how credible they are. And if they're the criterion of scientific credibility, then we do need to know who they are. They might just be flaky coinite.
Okay, so finally, let me hit you with one more point that the TED people make. You know, TED and TEDx are brands that are trusted in schools and homes. You know, they don't want to hear from some parent whose kid went off to South America to drink ayahuasca because TED said it was okay. I mean, Dr. Sheldrick, think of the children, or for that matter, some kid who winds up going to school thinking that telepathy is real or that consciousness extends beyond the brain. I mean, we don't want that. I mean, there's a limit to how far you can push an idea until it reaches the point where it's no longer worth spreading. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I agree some ideas are not worth spreading. I do agree with that. But exactly how you make the criterion is another question. And the sudden concern for children seems to me rather misplaced. There are already quite a few talks about psychedelics on the TED website, and the objection is no objection to those, apparently, only to the one by Graham Hancock. So I don't think this is a consistent objection about children. The other thing is that TED recently sent around a guideline to TEDx organizers telling them how to tell science from pseudo-science. It's rather an interesting document. And what it says is genuine science, how to tell genuine science. Basically, genuine science is what's being done by quite a lot of people in universities, approved and published in the leading peer-reviewed journals. And if you're in doubt, call up a professor at your local university and ask him about it. And if it's pseudo-science or if it's not genuine science, he'll tell you. Well, that would be a perfect way of eliminating anything to do with parapsychology from the TED Talks. And also, several people pointed out on their blogs, it would also have eliminated Albert Einstein, because only people who are holding academic posts should be considered to be real scientists. Einstein was a clerk in the patents office in Zurich when his great papers on quantum theory and relativity were published in 1905. And Charles Darwin never had an academic post. Darwin would have been classified as pseudoscience straight away on the TED criteria. So I think they've got themselves, they made a rash decision hurriedly, and they're trying to justify it. And the more they try to justify it, the more difficult their position becomes. And also, if they want to protect children, then why not protect them from some of these militant atheists who may have very disturbing effect on the children's thinking? And so I think that the whole attempt is actually one where TED have done themselves quite a lot of harm by taking an irrational decision and then trying to justify it in a way that is pretty unconvincing. I mean, I sympathize with them, and indeed when I talked to Chris Anderson, I sympathize with them. I mean, I wouldn't like to be an editor of a series like that, because there are people who are borderline cases. What do you? You do have to draw lines somewhere. I'm not against drawing lines. I think they have to be drawn. I just think they've handled it pretty badly.
So let me switch out of the mode of trying to put forth the TED ideas as much as I can glean them from their numerous blog posts and website comments. And let me ask you a couple of questions in general about this, because, the irony of this is, if not hilarious, it's certainly inescapable. I mean, a reputable scientist like yourself publishes a book claiming that science is dogmatic and then is censored by an anonymous scientific board. I mean, it's like you can't script that any better. What does this say about really the whole topic of your book, and about how science can be dogmatic without even realizing it's dogmatic.
Well, I think in a way, there's this whole controversy, and the people who've weighed in favor of the TED actions do indeed confirm what I'm saying, that these dogmas are ones that most people within science don't actually realize are dogmas. They just think they're the truth. And the point about really dogmatic people is that they don't know they have dogmas. Dogmas are beliefs, and people who have really strong beliefs think of their beliefs as the truth. They don't actually see them as beliefs. So I think this whole controversy has actually highlighted exactly that. The other thing it's highlighted is that there are a lot of people, far more than I imagined actually, who are not taken in by these dogmas, who do want to think about them critically. And one of the remarkable things about these discussions is lots and lots of people are really up for a discussion of these dogmas. They really want it to happen, far more than I'd imagined actually. So I was very impressed by that, and I think this TED debate has actually helped show that the paradigm is shifting, that there's no longer a kind of automatic agreement by the great majority of people to dogmatic assertions by materialists.
Yeah, it's almost as if this is somewhat of a marker of the kind of events that would happen in the process of changing a paradigm.
Yes, I think this is actually, for me, an illustration of actually seeing a paradigm shift in action. I think this controversy, it wouldn't have been a controversy after all if a lot of people hadn't thought that TED had made the wrong decision. There wouldn't have been large amounts, thousands of comments on blogs all over the internet. That wouldn't have happened if the majority thought TED had made the right decision and it was more or less a done deal that materialism was the only acceptable form of science. Now, I think the fact that so many people feel strongly about it is exactly why there's been a controversy. And I do think we're actually seeing a shift. Also, of course, on these various blogs and discussion forums, now and then one of the standard skeptic voices comes up with all the standard arguments that we've all heard hundreds of times before. But now they're being shot down by people, who are saying, okay, where's your evidence? And calling them on things which normally they'd get away with. That, too, is a change. It's a kind of empowerment of people to challenge this dogmatic materialism.
And maybe in a way, Chris Anderson has unwittingly done you a favor and done this cause, if you will, I hate to say it that way, but has done certainly your book a favor in drawing attention to your ideas. Do you think that might be true?
Well, I think it is actually. I mean, I don't think he's done it on purpose. And I don't have any personal grudge against Chris Anderson. When I talked to him, I found him a perfectly reasonable chap, and I enjoyed our conversation.
But Rupert, he does seem incredibly unaware of the situation as it exists. I mean, even when he tries to recover and says, okay, I understand consciousness is controversial, he has such a kindergarten appreciation for the issues that really are at hand and the controversy that really lies at the core of that issue of, are we these biological robots that are purely a product of our brain or not? I mean, yes. There's a guy it's going to take him a lot of education to get to where he could have an intelligent discussion about these issues, no?
Well, I think he's personally quite interesting. He studied philosophy at Oxford, and I think he told me, and I think it's probably true, that he's always been interested in the nature of consciousness. I think he probably is. I don't think he was making it up. I thought he was sincere. I think he is a bit behind. I mean, he's surrounded himself with the kind of materialist establishment, and if you look at his board of advisors, many of them are people who do have this very limited mechanistic view of consciousness. So I think he's living in a kind of mainstream world where he only gets to hear a rather limited range of opinions. But I think this controversy has made him aware that there are a lot more voices out there and a lot of people who don't think in that way. I think it's probably a steep learning curve he's on, because he obviously was very naive to start with, and he's realizing that actually a lot of people think differently.
Great. Well, Dr. Shedrake, we'll keep an eye on this issue and report to people if anything new happens. But other than that, can you tell us briefly what's going on with you and upcoming presentations you might have or anything else that's in the works?
Well, I'm doing various presentations in Europe and in Britain about my book, The Science Delusion, Science Set Free. The details are on my schedule. I'm doing a program in Dublin, Ireland, on science and spirituality in April. Again, that's on my schedule, and that's happening at Christ Church Cathedral. I'm doing it with the Dean of Christ Church. I haven't met yet, but I'm looking forward to that because I think that will be a chance for a dialogue in relatively orthodox spiritual setting, and to see how these new ideas in science play out in that kind of dialogue. I'm also, in the summer, much further ahead, I'm doing a program at Hollyhock in British Columbia in Canada, where in August, end of July, beginning of August, a remote and beautiful island where I go every summer with my family. And this time, for the first time, I'm doing it with my two sons, Merlin and Cosmo. Cosmo is an anthropologist and a musician, and Merlin is a tropical ecologist. He's doing a PhD on tropical ecology in Panama. He's a Smithsonian Research Fellow, and he's in England now, but he's just about to go back to the jungle. So we're doing one on called Plants, Minds, and Resonances, and they're both musicians. We have lively discussions at home. It's the first time we've ever done something together. So I know it's going to be fun for us. I hope it'll be fun for others too. So anyone who's interested in going to something where no one knows where it's going to lead, but where it's almost certain to be fun, that would be a good place to go. And then I'm doing a workshop in September with Mark Andrus, who's the Bishop of California, at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. And again, that would be something that will go where these discussions don't normally go. I mean, it'll be with a remarkably open-minded bishop, but a bishop all the same, in California. It's on his patch. And again, what we're going to be doing is looking at morphic resonance, holistic thinking in relation to spiritual practices, not spiritual dogmas, but spiritual practices, the things people actually do, like pilgrimages and prayers and mantras and chanting and ceremonies and rituals. So those are some of the things coming up ahead. And meanwhile, my main activity, as always, is research. And I've got various research projects afoot at the moment, and particularly ones on morphic resonance, which I'm planning in several laboratories in different parts of the world and engaged in discussing them with the scientists I'll be collaborating with. So more on that later. I don't want to talk too much about those now because they're in the planning stage still, and we hope to get them started within a matter of a few months or even weeks.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we'll certainly look forward to hearing more about that as it unfolds, and it sounds like you have some great forums in which people can meet you and see these ideas kind of take life. So anyone interested, I'm sure they'll check out your website and find you there. Well, Dr. Shedrake, thanks for coming on and talking about this interesting little controversy that has brewed, and thanks again for joining me.
Always a pleasure, Alex.
Thanks again to Dr. Shedrake for joining me today on Skeptico. A couple of questions to tee up for you. The first is, have the folks at TED, in particular Chris Anderson, done Rupert Shedrake a favor by highlighting the dogmatism that is in materialistic science, or have they merely stepped in and provided the appropriate controls that science needs to keep weird ideas from spreading around? And the second question, I'm going to make not such a lob softball question, and that's, how do well-meaning science, technology, edgy, whatever you want to call it, news sites properly filter information so that on one hand we don't have to wade through a lot of nonsense, but on the other hand we don't get a homogenized message, or worse yet, a message that has been intentionally shaped for a particular purpose? So those are a couple of questions I'd throw out there. The place to respond, of course, is through the Skeptiko website at skeptiko.com. You can leave a message in the comment section or click on over to the forum and join us for a discussion there. As I mentioned at the beginning, I have a number of shows stacked up in the hopper ready to get out. So I'm going to try and get them out once a week here for a while until I get caught up. I hope you'll stay with me for all of that. I hope you'll, as usual, tell your friends about Skeptiko, blog about Skeptiko, get as many folks as you feel you'd like to involved in this community of a little bit closer to truth seekers, I guess you could say. But until then, take care and bye for now.